Question: can a nation conceived in liberty carry its head high if it denies protection to the youngest and most vulnerable of its citizens? Can a country founded on God-given rights continue to thrive without understanding that life is a precious gift from our Creator? I believe that great nations and great civilizations spring from a people who have a moral compass. I don't think a civilization can long endure that does not have respect for all human life, born and not yet born. As a physician, I have looked into the eyes of 1-pound babies. I have cradled their small bodies in the palm of one hand. I defy those who are careless, who would disregard life, look at these tiny little miracles and say, we're not going to protect that. But I believe there will come a time when we are all judged on whether or not we took a stand in defense of all life from the moment of conception until our last natural breath. As a teenager, I gave my first public speech in my church. My hand shook, my heart pounded. I thought to myself, I can't do this, but somehow I did, and because I wanted to talk about things that were important, I persisted. I chided my church as a senior in high school for not seeming to care about the not yet born, for looking the other way, and for not taking a stand on life. I will be in earnest. I will not equivocate, and I will not excuse. I will not retreat an inch, and I will be heard. One thing I promise you, I will always take a stand for life.
Wasn't that great? What's even better than the video is the man who inspired it. You know, it's not, I think, by accident, but by providential design that a doctor with this heart and these guts comes to the U.S. Senate in time to fight Obamacare, right when we need him. He's not only an MD, he's an ophthalmologist, and as the son of an ophthalmologist, I can tell you that's pretty important. I think he's the only one in Congress. He won a seat in 2010 against the establishment of his own party, and from the day he got here, he's done nothing but fight for you and fight for faith and fight for freedom. Please welcome the junior senator from the state of Kentucky, Rand Paul.
Well, in the video it said my hands shook and my heart pounded. They still does a little bit sometimes, but I think I'm getting better. I'm trying anyway. But I want to thank Ralph for inviting me again this year. It's good to be back at Faith and Freedom. I think that too often our culture, though, seeks to separate faith and freedom. But I think both are essential. Without virtue, freedom casts about, and I think chaos beckons. Freedom needs virtue, and virtue needs freedom. The soothing voices, they seek to reassure us, saying, everything's okay, everything's just fine, all is well, but all is not well. America's not just experiencing growing pains, America is in a full-blown spiritual crisis. America's challenge, as Os Guinness puts it, is not wolves at the door, but termites in the floor. Our foundation is cracking. It's not that we've chosen the wrong politicians, although that's a debatable question. It's more fundamental than that. It requires a deeper introspection. We should pray for our country and our leaders. We need those prayers to face a great challenge, the great challenge of our time. We've arrived at that day of reckoning. Will we falter, or will we thrive and rediscover our greatness? America has much greatness left in her if we believe in ourselves, if we believe in our founding documents, if we believe in the system that has made us the richest, freest, and most humanitarian nation ever. America will thrive when we realize that freedom requires faith to sustain it. Guinness gets it right when he writes in his book that the only proper restraint to freedom is self-restraint. What does that mean? It means that those of us who love freedom must realize that freedom is not a license to do as you please. Freedom can only be realized when citizens know self-restraint, or put another way, virtue. This parallels what George Washington talked about when he said that democracy requires a virtuous people. Laws alone, though, are not enough to civilize a nation. What America needs is not just another politician or more promises. What America needs is a revival. Yes. Now that I've been to Washington for a couple years and I've seen what goes on up here, I've seen the belly of the beast, I can tell you without exaggeration that I've met the enemy, and the enemy is too often us. The enemy's the bipartisan looting of the Treasury, the bipartisan destruction of our currency, the bipartisan sprint away from a republic limited by a constitution. They pass 1,000-page bills that no one's read. Republicans and Democrats ignore their own rules to publish bills to vote on them that haven't even been published in advance. I say it must end. No bill should ever pass that's not been read. I have a proposal. I say make them wait one day for every 20 pages. That'll keep them busy for a while. Congress routinely passes laws that they exempt themselves from. I say Congress should pass no law that exempts themselves. Over time, many politicians become distant and distanced from their constituents, from doing real work, from knowing what it's like the rest of us, to work for a paycheck, to produce something of value. That's why I believe it's absolutely essential, and it is the right time, for term limits. Yes. To find our way back to the traditions of our founders, we need to understand how freedom and tradition are intertwined. Don Devine writes, and he says, freedom needs tradition for law, order, and inspiration. But tradition needs freedom to escape stagnation, coercion, and decline. The great achievement of the Constitution's framers was in providing a means for synthesizing freedom and tradition. America needs to revive tradition, or as Os Guinness might say, America needs to revive virtue. Or as Billy Graham might say, America needs to revive the hope that springs eternal from the transcendent teachings of a humble carpenter. Amen. Amen. Government can supply bread, but it can't mend a broken spirit. Mother Teresa was once praised for her social work in India, and she said, "We're not social workers. We do this for Jesus." No government social worker can claim the same motivation. Citizenship and good government require the involvement of a virtuous people. Your faith and your church are and should be part of the public arena. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Amen. Reject any politician who claims that faith can't be part of a public life. As my friend Ralph Reed likes to say, the First Amendment's not about keeping religious people out of government, it's about keeping government out of religion. Now, some seem to think that you have to choose one or the other, either liberty or virtue. I think they've got it wrong. Liberty is absolutely essential to virtue. It is our freedom to make individual choices that allows us to be virtuous. This doesn't mean that government cannot or should not reflect our values. In fact, it must. Some seek to separate religious liberty from economic liberty. Some seek to say our values have no place in public policy. That's not the way it should be. Hobby Lobby is owned by a Christian family. The government's trying to force them to buy insurance that covers something that they find morally objectionable. Their lawyer describes this situation. I love the way he put it together. He says, you know what? Obamacare forces us to abandon our faith to stay in business, or abandon our business to stay true to our faith. That's wrong. No government should force anyone to choose between their faith and pursuing their livelihood. Reagan understood the unity of this message when he wrote, "We do not have a separate social agenda, a separate economic agenda, and a separate foreign agenda. We have one agenda. Just as surely as we seek to put our financial house in order, rebuild our nation's defenses, so too we seek to protect the unborn, to end the manipulation of school children by utopian planners, and to permit an acknowledgement of a supreme being in our classrooms." Another way we as Christians should stand up to the current status quo is in foreign policy. Reagan, in one of his earliest speeches, said, "The record of history is clear. Citizens of the U.S. resort to force reluctantly and only when we must." Eisenhower, the great general, expressed it similarly. He said, "Our foreign policy is not difficult to state. We are for peace first, last, and always." Reagan believed in strength, but he also believed in peace. He wrote, as for the enemies of freedom, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. Our reluctance for conflict should not be misjudged as a failure of will. When action is required to preserve our national security, we will act. Reagan spoke often of peace through strength. But I fear that some in our nation and some in our party have forgotten the first part of the sentence, that peace should be our goal even as we build our strength. Some in my party have distorted this belief in peace through strength into a misguided belief that we should project strength through war. Even when we've tried through good intentions to make the world a better place, our actions have often backfired. Jesus reminds us what our goal should be when he proclaims, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." This doesn't mean we won't defend ourselves. If attacked, it is our duty to defend your family, to defend your country, to defend our freedom. During the Iraq War, though, think of what happened. 250,000 Iraqi Christians fled Iraq. They feared the Shiite government that's there now, that we helped put in place after Saddam. They fled in droves by the hundreds of thousands. Where did they go? They headed mostly for Syria, joining over 1 million Syrians who have lived as Christians since the time of Christ. Now President Obama is, no applause please, sorry. Now President Obama is arming Islamic rebels in Syria. The vast majority of Christians in Syria, though, are on the opposite side of the war. We are arming Islamic rebels that are intent on killing Christians. One recent massacre stands out from others. In 2013, Islamic marauders invaded the little town of Malula, an ancient Christian city where they still speak Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke. The villagers have been Christians since the time of Christ. As the Islamic rebels swarmed into town, they demanded that everyone convert to Islam or die. Sarkis el-Zakam, a brave young man, stood up and answered them, and he said, "I am a Christian, and if you must kill me, do it." Those were his last words. Elsewhere in Syria, Islamic rebels have filmed beheadings of their captives. 2 Christian bishops have been kidnapped and 1 priest killed. There is an irony that is impossible to escape. Our tax dollars are funding Islamic rebels who are killing Christians. Now they will say, "Oh, we're only giving it to the moderate rebels." I defy them to tell me that they can tell with certainty who they're giving the weapons to. In Pakistan, Asia Bibi sits on death row because she's a Christian. She's been there 5 years. In Iran, Saeed Abedini suffers in a prison because he is a Christian. American tax dollars are often flowing to countries that are doing this. Pakistan's gotten billions of dollars while persecuting Christians. There's a war on Christianity going on, and sometimes you're being asked to pay for it. I say not one penny to any country that persecutes Christians. Recently, we discovered that Islamic rebels that President Obama is arming have been provided with anti-tank weapons. They made an announcement 2 weeks ago that they are now intent on attacking Israel when they're done with Assad. They said they're going after the Golan Heights next, and Israel's on their target list, and we have given them weapons, sophisticated anti-tank weapons, and these are the moderate rebels you're giving weapons to? In country after country, mobs burn the American flag and chant death to America. Congress's response? Send them more money. Send more money to these haters of Christianity. Hamas has now joined the Palestinian Authority. Why? They say, frankly, we're broke and we need money. Maybe the Americans will give us money. But are they renouncing anything they say? They're not renouncing one iota of what they stand for. Hamas calls for the destruction of Israel. Your money's going to be going to them soon. I say not one penny to nations that pledge violence to Israel. It's time to stop this madness. We need to re-examine our foreign policy, halt this aid to Islamic rebels in Syria, Egypt, and elsewhere, and take a good, hard look at what our foreign policy has done. Back here at home, we have a war being waged. Takes over 1 million lives every year. It's a war against the unborn, and it must end. When Pope John Paul II spoke about a culture of death, he talked about a war of the powerful against the weak. As Christians, we know we must always stand with the most defenseless. I believe that no nation, no civilization can long endure that doesn't respect life from those that are not yet born to life's last breath. To protect life, I have introduced in the Senate a Federal Life at Conception Act, and I will stand up for unborn children as long as I'm privileged to be in office. These days, Christians are often unified in our defense of life, but too many are still not taking action or voting their beliefs. We must change this. Last year, I stood in the Garden of Gethsemane. As we stood there, awed, we sang, "How great thou art, how great thou art." It was a really moving experience. I'll never forget it. The hymn exhorts, "Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee." When our message bursts forth like song, when our message bursts forth with the passion of Patrick Henry, when our message comes as a song from our soul, full of compassion, full of enduring truth, then and only then will freedom reign. When I was home recently, I was going through some old letters that my great-great-grandmother had written about the turn of the last century. And I'd like to close with a blessing that my great-grandmother wrote to her son in 1903 when he was away working a few hours away in Youngstown, Ohio. She wrote to him and said, "Our Sabbath was lovely, which I spent at home as usual. But the dear Lord willing, I hope I can soon go back to his house again. Anyway, his grace is sufficient for me. There is a song in my soul today, though, a blessed sunshine that no outward circumstances can take away. The Lord is a sun and a shield to all that trust in him. May he always be your God." Thank you, and God bless America.